Have they started all over already? We gotta get up there. horrible. I have what? I don't know what's on here. Welcome. You're not gonna let me get a shot, is you? You got it. No shot. Of course. Oh, come on now. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, big dog. Yup. What are you doing?
Huh?
What are you doing?
Nothing.
You mad? What are you mad about? Talk to me.
I am mad.
You tell me later? Is it because of me?
No,
Because what?
it's a game.
What game?
But,
What happened? They're hacking or what?
no.
What happened?
No, just because Fortnite put this box that has a healing factor,
Mm-hmm.
and the mythics do, well, 20 damage, but still, healing factor is health.
Yeah.
It's pretty overpowered, and the Marvel season, it's a Marvel season, so it's gotta be Wolverine. It actually more sense if it's definitely even better. But cool.
So what? It was hard to defeat or what?
Yeah, he's hard.
That's why you gotta always put your settings on high, bro.
That's what I know. I'm thinking about getting my whole squad in.
Yeah, it's hard to get a squad that's faithful. Because sometimes you get into a squad and they're just thinking about their points, you know what I mean? And they'll watch what you're doing all the work, they're sitting in the background, you'll get the boss to like a certain level and they'll come and start then fighting. So you gotta check out, see who's doing the work. You can't just run with anybody, bro. Hey, Maximus. Max.
Yeah?
What do you need to defeat him? Hi, Max. Maximus. Max,
Yeah?
what do you need to defeat him?
How to get his skin?
How can you defeat him?
Oh, basically you just have to get lucky. He spawns in 2 places.
Oh,
But
yeah?
like on each, on the other side of the map, but like two different places.
Did you research the best way to defeat him or what?
It's rare. It's hard.
Where's Coco? Coco. Come on.
She did something wrong.
Huh?
Did she do something wrong?
No. Come on. Welcome.
Well, at the full part of the emergence, there will be millions of insects out per acre. They'll be everywhere. It really is insect mayhem.
This is the periodical cicada.
This one is a male. You know that because on the abdomen there's a pair of organs called tymples, and they're sound-producing organs. It's a little membrane. It's vibrated. Makes a sound.
I don't have to be frightened of these, do I?
No, no, they're
They're coming for me.
absolutely harmless. They make wonderful pets.
Really? They're quite ticklish.
It's a harmless insect. It doesn't bite. It doesn't sting. Its only defense is safety in numbers.
By emerging in such vast numbers, each individual cicada minimizes its risk of being eaten. Because there are so many of them, their predators simply can't get them fast enough.
Well, you can certainly hear the cicadas.
Yes, you can. There are probably millions of them up there.
Millions.
And what you probably don't realize is you're only hearing half the population. Well, only the males make these loud sounds. There are just as many females up there as well.
And it's kind of extraordinary to think that what if we came here next year,
Good shot.
This sound at all.
We're going to have to come back in 13 years.
So 2024 is when you'll hear the forest singing like this again.
Oh, that's right.
That's amazing. Why have the cicadas evolved with this 13-year life cycle as opposed to any other number?
Well, you have to remember that these cicadas require large numbers to survive predators. And so we think that these long life cycles in some way help them maintain large populations.
John believes that by appearing every 13 years, the cicadas minimise their chances of emerging at the same time as other cicadas with different life cycles. Because if they were to interbreed, it could have disastrous consequences.
The offspring would have unusual life cycles. They're going to emerge some this year, some that year in small numbers. And that's key, because if they emerge in small numbers, the predators eat them.
The cicada's survival depends on avoiding other broods.
Come on.
Imagine you've got a brood of cicadas that appears every 6 years. Now let's suppose there's another brood which wants to try and avoid the red cicadas. Now one way to do that would be to appear less often in the forest, and that actually works. So let's suppose this brood appears every 9 years.
Oh shit, I almost got it.
So if the green cicada appears every 9 years, then it only coincides with the red cicada every 18 years. But rather surprisingly, a smaller number, 7, works even better.
Coming out every 7 years instead of every 9 means the cicadas appear together much less often.
Now they only coincide every 42 years. That's just twice every century.
And for the real cicadas, a 13-year life cycle has exactly the same effect as 7 does here, because they both belong to a special series of numbers.
Like 13, 7 is a prime number. Unlike other numbers, primes can only be divided by themselves and 1. And it's this property that means that numbers that are separated by primes are far less likely to coincide with multiples of other numbers.
What you usually play? What are you playing? What do you need busts
13
for?
is a prime number. A 13-year life cycle makes the cicadas much less likely to coincide with other groups.
What do you play?
Up the road in Georgia, there's another brood of periodical cicada, and they too have a prime number life cycle. They come out every 17 years. Now, because 13 and 17 are both prime numbers, the two broods only emerge
What games do you
together
play?
once every 221 years.
Prime numbers are intimately linked to the cicada's survival.
Thanks for the follow. I'm gonna come check you out when I'm done streaming.
The code. Because the code is a mathematical world built from numbers.
Just as atoms are the indivisible units that make up every physical object, so prime numbers are the indivisible building blocks of the code.
prime numbers are indivisible, which means they can't be made by multiplying any other numbers together. But every non-prime number can be created by multiplying primes together. It's impossible to make any numbers without them. And if any primes are missing, there will always be some numbers you can't create. For me, the fact that the most fundamental units of mathematics can be found woven into the natural world is not only compelling evidence that the code exists, but also that numbers underpin everything, including our own biology.
Good game, bro.
This is an innately human characteristic. Music is one of the things which defines who we are, and each culture has its own particular style. These guys make it seem so effortless, as if the notes are just thrown together. But that's simply an illusion.
Because just as numbers govern the cicadas' lives, so they determine how we hear sound.
That's a C. And using this oscilloscope, I can get a picture of that note. So I can actually see the sound wave. Now, the height of the wave corresponds to how loudly I'm playing the note. So if I play the note very quietly, play it very loudly, suddenly get a huge wave on the screen. Now, the more important thing is the distance between the peaks of the wave, because that's determined by the pitch or frequency of the note.
The higher the note, the shorter the distance between the peaks.
Hello, what?
Really?
Judy.
Ah, hello.
Marcus.
Her research investigates the psychological effects of sound. And by using complex ratios instead of simple ones, the noises she creates are nothing like music.
You can see just by looking at it, it's not going to sound nice.
The wave looks a mess.
Wave.
Yeah.
The wave is a mess. It's very difficult to see a pattern. Okay? It sounds really quite odd now. It doesn't have any pitch, it sounds harsh, and I could make it louder and that would make it harsher. When the various frequencies aren't simple multiples of one another, there's no common pattern for the ear to respond to. And the more complex you make the ratios, the more dissonant and harsh the sound will get.
By monitoring her victims' reactions to these appalling noises, Professor Edworthy has found they have a very different effect on our minds than music. They're so unpleasant, they shock our brains into action.
For example, a siren.
Good game.
Okay, that's quite a harsh sound, but it's designed for a purpose, and that's to get you out of the way. Sometimes you find these sounds in the animal world as well. So this, for example, this is a chimpanzee and an orangutan. Okay, these animals are obviously quite bothered by something. You don't need to know what that sound means to know that that animal's not happy. also that the other animals in that environment, and you just get out of the way.
So it's interesting that we really hear pattern, and,
Yes.
and when it isn't there, it creates an effect in all of us.
Remarkably, it's numerical patterns in the code that dictate the combinations of sounds we hear as music and those we hear simply as noise. And perhaps stranger still, it's these same numbers that are built into the walls of this medieval cathedral.
Come on, bro. What the hell am I doing?
Two notes which are an octave apart, and the beat is 1:2 ratio. The width of the nave here is twice the distance between each of the columns that run up its length, a ratio of 2:1. The most harmonious combination of notes you can have. The altar divides the nave into a ratio of 8:5.
8-5.
Minor sixth, 8:5. Perfect fifth, 3:2. Perfect fourth is 4:3. Major third, 5:4. And that's what music is all about.
St. Augustine believed these ratios were used by God to construct the universe, and that was why they produced harmony in music. By constructing their cathedral using the same ratios, the clergy at Chartres hoped to echo God's creation.
This entire place is a symphony set in stone.
Yeah.
Using the code's numbers has created a building of awe-inspiring beauty.
Welcome.
The oldest of various seemingly significant numbers.
Come on, Quentin.
By searching for divine meaning in numbers, 12th century scholars had stumbled across elements of the code.
It's very difficult to see a pattern.
Mysterious numbers and patterns that seem to be written into our biology.
Its only defense is a safety in numbers.
Hell
As we get closer,
yeah. Good
we
job.
haven't simply found more numbers.
Welcome.
We've begun to uncover their strangest properties and started to see deep connections between them.
Back in the distant past, in Neolithic times, around 4,000 years ago, an ancient people brought these stones here and arranged them like this. This is sunken curtain
Oh,
in
no.
Cumbria, and it's one of around 1,000 such structures that our ancient ancestors built across the UK.
Stretching back into the mists of time, the circle has been steeped in mysticism.
Whether the people who built this structure knew it or not, there is deep significance hidden inside this circle. Okay, so I need to start by measuring the diameter of my circle. So that's from one edge to the other. I need to go roughly through the centre. 90. Right. So now I'm going to measure the circumference
This handle.
around the outside. God, not so much exercise doing maths before. And circumference. So I've got 91 meters and 70 centimeters. What I'm going to do is to do a little calculation. I'm going to divide the circumference of the circle by the diameter. So 17 divided by 279. That's roughly 3. Bit of mental arithmetic, not a mathematician's strongest point. Okay, 2 lots of 279. So, not far out from what I was hoping for. So when I do that, I get roughly 3.2 as the answer.
My measurements weren't very precise, but my answer is close to a mysterious number hidden within every circle.
So, for example, let's take this circular plate. Now I'm going to measure its diameter, 26.4 centimetres. Now its circumference, it's a bit trickier.
This what makes you or breaks you as a pool player, bro.
Centimetres. Divide the circumference by the diameter, and I get 3.14. Now let's take another circle. Measure its diameter, 12.8 centimetres. So the circumference is 40.2 centimetres. Divide the circumference by the diameter, and I get 3.14. In fact, whatever circle I take, divide the circumference by the diameter,
You always get 3.14.
This is a number we call pi.
No matter where the circles are, no matter how big or small, they will always contain pi.
It's this universality of the number pi which tells you that you've identified a piece of true code. In fact, if you get another number, it means that you haven't got a circle. In some sense, pi is the essence of circleness, distilled into the language of the code.
And because circles and curves crop up again and again in nature, pi can be found all around us. It's in the gentle curve of a river, the shape of a coastline, and the shifting patterns of the desert sands. Pi seems written into the structures and processes of our planet. But strangely, pi also appears in places that seem to have nothing to do with circles.
I started fishing in Brighton in 1972. I'm a fisherman 40 years, catching Dover sole. That's the main target species.
How many fish do you think you get a day?
300 some days, 150 other days. So 200 would be average.
And you got me some Dover sole today,
Yes.
so I can have a way of what you've got
Yes,
today.
you can play with them.
Okay.
What's remarkable is that with just a small amount of information,
It's 180 grams.
and by weighing a few fish,
That's a whopper.
I can use the code to tell me things about not just today's catch,
60 grams, 50 grams, 110 grams.
but about all the Dover sole ever fished.
The largest sole that Sam is likely to...
Big winner.
Which way the fish is, or the meat, so it's 140 plus 190 plus 150. So now I need to work out the standard deviation, so that's 140 plus that. Bear with me, alright? Okay, almost there. So he said he fished for 40 years and 8 weeks during the year, 6 days out of the week, and 200 sole each day. So that gives you a total of 384,000 fish.
Let's see what they're talking about.
Now, using these numbers, I can calculate that the largest one out of those 384,000 fish should be about 1.3 kilograms, which is roughly 3 pounds. So what's the largest Dover sole that you've caught in your career?
We call them doormats, the large ones, and you maybe get 4 or 5 a season. The largest, I'd say, was 3.5 pounds. An average Dover sole is that sort of size, and these.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah.
It's always nice to catch big stuff, you know. Well, I think it is anyway.
Using the code, it's possible to estimate the size of the biggest fish Sam's piece. And it's thought that any number you can possibly imagine will appear in pi somewhere. From my birthday to the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Because they go on forever, we can never know all the digits that make up pi. But luckily,
You can find everybody's birthday in that shit, though.
To calculate the circumference of a circle, the size of the entire observable universe, accurate to the radius of a single hydrogen atom. But as strange as pi is, it does at least describe a physical object. Some numbers don't make any sense in the real world, despite the fact we use them all the time. Numbers like negative numbers.
Is it possible to trade anything? Stocks, shares, currency, even fish without negative numbers? Most of us are comfortable with them. Even though we may not like it, we understand what it means to have a negative bank balance. One fish, or 2 fish, or no fish at all. It's much harder to imagine what -1 fish looks like. Negative numbers are so odd that if I have -1 fish and you give me a fish, then all you can be certain of is that I've got no fish at all.
Numbers can exist regardless of whether they make any sense in the physical world. And if you think that's odd, some numbers are so strange, they don't even seem to make sense as numbers.
Now, this is one of the most basic facts of mathematics. A positive number multiplied by another positive number is a positive number. So, for example, 1 times 1 is 1. A negative number multiplied by another negative number also gives a positive number. So, for example, -1 times -1 is +1.
It's not only a rule, it's a proven truth of multiplication. Whenever the signs are the same, the product is always positive.
From this, it's obvious then that if I take any number and multiply it by itself, then the answer is going to be positive. However, in the code, there's a special number which breaks this rule. When I multiply it by itself, it gives the answer -1.
It's impossible to imagine what this number could be, because there simply is no number that when multiplied by itself gives -1.
This isn't a number I can calculate. I can't show you this number. Nevertheless, we've given this number a name. It's called I, and it's part of a whole class of new numbers called imaginary numbers.
Calculating with imaginary numbers is the mathematical equivalent of believing in fairies. But even these strangest elements of the code turn out to have some very practical applications.
So if I'm marking you on ground, can you call me please 119, that's answer. 1.25 clear land, 130, less than 5 knots.
Especially on a day like this.
Thank you. Vacate the next right and box and 13 short.
So, where's this one coming from?
That is from Barcelona. It's an EasyJet flight. It's EZ6402. Don't know exactly how many people on board, but it seats about 190.
And here he's coming in. I can see
Yeah,
he's
he's
getting
just-
pretty close now.
It's just less than 2 miles to go till he lands.
So what sort of information is the radar giving you about the aeroplanes?
Okay, well, the first and most important thing you can get is the position of the aircraft. The yellow slash there is where the aircraft actually is.
Right.
You got the blue trail. That's the history of where the aircraft's been. So from that you get two things.
Nice.
You get its rough heading, which way it's going, and also its speed. The longer the trail, the faster the aircraft's going.
Radar works by sending out a pulse of radio waves and analysing the small fraction of the signal that's reflected back. Complex computation is then needed to distinguish moving objects, like planes, from the stationary background. And at the heart of that analysis lies I, the number that cannot exist.
Imaginary numbers are incredibly useful for working out the complex way that radio waves interact with each other. It just seems to be the right language to describe their behaviour. I mean, you could do these calculations with ordinary numbers, but they're so cumbersome. By the time that you've done the calculation, the plane's moved to somewhere else.
Altitude 6,000 on a squawk of 7715.
Using imaginary numbers makes the calculations so much simpler that you can track the planes in real time. In fact, without them, radar would be next to useless for air traffic control.
Schedule 75 Mike Lima, confirm stand 10.
I mean, it's kind of amazing that this abstract idea lands planes.
It's a bit surprising. You talk about things like imaginary numbers, and this isn't imaginary. This is real.
This is very real. I'm surprised, actually, at the fact that
Welcome.
something so abstract is being used in such a concrete way.
As strange as it may seem, the code provides us with an astonishingly successful description of our world. Its most ethereal numbers have starkly real applications, and its patterns can explain one of the most profound processes in nature: how living things grow.
This is a picture of something I've been fascinated by ever since I became a mathematician. It's an X-ray of a marine animal called a nautilus. And this spiral here is one of the iconic images of mathematics. Now, while I've seen pictures like this hundreds of times, I've never actually seen the animal for real.
At Brooklyn College, biologist Jennifer Basil keeps 5 of these aquatic denizen
Nice.
for her research into the evolution of intelligence.
You better not get this.
So we keep the animals in these tall, dark tanks because they're naturally active.
So they
at night
play
and they like
defense,
darkness, they
baby.
live in deep water, and they also like to go up and down in the water column. That kind of makes them happy. So
Okay.
we give them the 5-star treatment here.
Right.
So this is number 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh, big eyes.
Yeah, they have huge eyes. They're great for seeing in low light conditions. Here's that beautiful shell. The
Yeah.
striping pattern helps them hide where they live.
I've never seen the animal before inside the shell. What is it?
Oh, they're actually related to octopuses, squids, and cuttlefish. It's a little bit like an octopus with a shell. And what's amazing about them is that their lineage is hundreds of millions of years old, and they really haven't changed much in all that time. So we call them a living fossil. So it's a really great opportunity to look at an ancient brain, ancient behavior, and they're a wonderful way to study the evolution of some are smarter than others. Like, that's number 4. He outperforms everybody in all the memory tests. And
But what does the Nautilus use the shell for?
well, I think the most obvious use is protection. They also use it for buoyancy. They only live in the front chamber, and all the other chambers are filled with gas and with some fluid. And by regulating that, they can gently and passively move up and down in the water like a submarine. And then the really cool thing they can do is they can actually survive on the oxygen in the chambers if there's a period of time where for some reason oxygen goes down in the ocean. So it's one of the reasons they've lived for so long, for millions of years. It's a really great adaptation. The shell is really amazing.
But perhaps even more remarkably, the rules this ancient creature uses to construct its home are written in the language of the code.
The Nautilus shell really is one of the most beautiful and intricate structures in nature. Here you can see the chambers. This is the one where it lives, and these are the ones that it uses for buoyancy. Now, at first sight, this looks like a really complex shape. But if I measure the dimensions of these chambers, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Now, there doesn't seem to be any connection between these numbers, but look what happens when I take each number and divide it by the previous measurement. So if I take 3.32 and divide by 3.07, I get 1.08. Divide 3.59 by 3.32, and I get 1.08. Take 3.88 and divide by 3.59, and I get again 1.08. Same number. So what happens by looking at the shell, this actually tells us the Nautilus is growing at a constant rate. So every time the Nautilus builds a new room, the dimensions of that room are 1.08 times the dimensions of the previous one. And it's just by following this simple mathematical that the Nautilus builds this elegant spiral.
The rules nature uses to create its patterns within it. Behind the word we have, there are strange mathematics.
They're actually really
They're quite ticklish.
The numbers and connections at its heart describe the processes all around us.
Bear with me, alright?
But the code doesn't just contain the rules of the
Thanks for the follow. Come check you out.
We gaze out into the night sky and try to make sense of the patterns we see in the stars.
Come on, bro. Can you get one? I don't want that. Wow.
At nearly 3,600
There we go.
It's a great place to gaze at the stars.
Well, it's a really clear night, so you can see loads of stars. There's Sirius over here, the brightest star in the night sky, and then right here is a recognisable constellation, which is Orion. That group of stars, and they all have different legends about it. So the Egyptians associated it with the sun, their gods of death. Other cultures called the three stars of the belt, and one group of Aborigines in Australia called
We don't need legends to explain the patterns in the stars. We know their precise positions in space. And we don't just know where they are now. We know where they were yesterday and where they'll be millions of years into the future.
Let's go, big money, big money, big money. Big money.
in orbits around the centre.
Come on.
Although they're all moving in rough start to change as thousands of years tick by.
Oh my God.
And now we're 2.5 million years in the future. And
Come on.
And in fact, thousands of years would have seen will also see different patterns.
Lord.
The reason we can predict
Oh my God.
is because we've uncovered not in the heavens.
What?
It's only through the
Nothing.
From the motion of the planets, the flight of the projectile.
When you watch the fireball fly through the air, and it appears
It's getting boring.
but it's accelerating upwards. And then it begins to slow down before it stops just above me, and then finally accelerates back down towards the ground.
But if you analyse the flight using numbers, it reveals something rather surprising.
When you plot a graph of the projectile's vertical speed against time, then you get a graph which looks like this.
To start with, the projectile is travelling upwards, so its vertical speed is positive. As it reaches the top of its arc,
Let's see.
the vertical
All
speed
in.
becomes negative as the fireball turns round and falls back to Earth.
Because the graph is going like this, it means that the projectile, from the moment it leaves the trebuchet, is actually slowing down. So at no point during the flight is it ever accelerating upwards.
Throughout its flight, the fireball is in fact accelerating downwards towards the Earth at a constant rate. Something you would never realise simply by watching it fly through the air. And And this is a profound truth about one of the fundamental forces of nature. Gravity.
Drop, throw, fire or launch anything you like. A rock, a bullet, ball or even a pot plant. And it will accelerate towards the ground at a constant rate of 9.8 meters per second per second. This is a fundamental law of gravity on our planet. But it's only revealed by changing the flight path of the object into numbers.
Appreciating this simple fact about how gravity works on Earth is the first step towards understanding gravity everywhere. It's the foundation stone of Newton's law of universal gravitation. A mathematical theory that can describe the orbits of the planets, predict the passage of the stars into the distant future, and has even enabled humankind to set foot on the moon. The laws that command the heavens are written in the code.
We call them doormats, the large ones.
2.5 million years in the future.
This isn't imaginary, this is real.
I'm disappointed in myself.
You don't need to know what that sound means to know that that animal's not happy.
Whatever circle I take, you're going to get a number which starts at 3.14. It's an incredible thought that the only way that we can really make sense of our world is by using the abstract world of numbers. And yet those numbers have allowed us to take our first tentative steps off our planet. And they've also given us the technology to transform our surroundings. A hidden code that underpins the world around us. A code that has the power to unlock the laws that govern the universe. This place is constructed to satisfy a spiritual need. Without the power of the code. For me, it's an exquisite example of the beauty and potency of mathematics.
From the patterns and numbers all around us, we've deciphered a hidden code. We've revealed a strange and intriguing numerical world, totally unlike our own. Yet it's a code that also describes our world with astonishing accuracy. And has given us unprecedented power to describe, and predict our surroundings.
Wanna go again, bro?
The fact that the code provides such a successful description of nature is for many one of the greatest mysteries of science. I think that the only explanation which makes sense for me is that by discovering these connections, you have in fact uncovered some deep truth about the world. That perhaps the code is the truth of the universe, and it's numbers that dictate the way the world must be. Giant's
Welcome.
Causeway at the northern tip of Northern Ireland. And it's famed for these strange angular rocks. There are 40,000 of them crammed into this small area of coastline. What makes them so striking is that they're so regular, so simple. They just don't seem to fit into this rugged, natural environment.
The mystery of these hexagonal rock formations has inspired storytellers and composers. But their strange beauty is only the start of the story. Because these stones tell of a hidden geometric force that underpins and pervades all nature.
Welcome.
And if we can uncover
Combo
that
corner.
force, it will help us to explain the shape of everything. From the smallest microbe to the
Yikes.
construction of these stones, the formation of the world itself.
He's gonna get mad.
As a mathematician, I'm fascinated by the numbers and shapes we see all around us. Connecting everything, from bees to bubbles,
Let's see.
and the handiwork of our distant ancestors to the imagination of our greatest modern artists.
Yes. Oh yeah.
These are the hidden connections that make up the code. An abstract, enigmatic world of numbers that has given us the most detailed description of our world we've ever had. Ever since they settled here over 30,000 years ago, people have tried to explain these remarkable hexagonal columns poking out of the Irish Sea. Why are they the shape they are? And where did they come from in the first place?
Legend has it that this peninsula was once home to a giant called Finn McCool. One day, the giant got into an argument with another giant called Ben O'Donnell, who lived 80 miles away across the sea in Scotland.
Of course
The
not.
giants hurled insults at each other, swiftly followed by a few stones, and things soon got out of hand. Ben and Donna swore that if he was a better swimmer, he'd come straight over to sort Finn out.
Finn was so enraged that he started picking up huge clumps of earth and throwing them across the sea to create a pathway for the Scottish giant to come and face him. And that, legend has it, is what I'm standing on now, the handiwork of a giant.
It's a nice story, but the reality is even more extraordinary. Because what's written into these rocks is a fundamental truth about the universe. A truth that we can find written throughout the natural world. These orchards in California are the site of one of the largest animal migrations on the planet. Every spring, billions of bees are brought here to help pollinate the almond trees. Several thousand of these hives belong to Steve Godwin.
We go ahead and smoke it when we get it open. All right then.
That's good.
Got this glued together very tight. We want to try to get an outside one so as not to kill the queen. You don't want to kill any of them, but you particularly don't want to kill her. If you kill the queen, you've killed the hive.
Wow. That's one of the wonders of the natural world. It's beautiful.
The bee's honeycomb is a marvel of natural engineering.
They've got plenty of honey.
Everything they need is here. It's a place to raise their young and store their food. And it's all made from wax, a substance so radiant that the bees have to drop the equivalent of 2 minutes round the earth to produce honey.
This almost looks man-made, manufactured.
Yeah.
Lines, straight lines, correct?
Right, it's cool. Right. It's an engineering wonder for sure.
I know, it's perfect. Excellent.
It's amazing. And the hexagon is a very strong structure.
The bees have made an identical design to the columns on the giant's causal. Each cell is exactly like yours. 6 walls meeting precisely at 120 degrees. And every homebrewer, everywhere in the world, knows how to build these shapes. It's as if the hexagon is built into the
Thank you. Appreciate it. Really?
Looking over the colors of the bubble, you're actually looking at a contour map of the surface of the bubble. So like everything you make the bubbles are just trying to become more, to try to get as small as they possibly can. In the case of bubbles, they can do it perfectly. A single bubble in the air is always a sphere. For the sun, it seems obvious that the bubbles should be there.
Why is the sphere so special? The sphere is one surface, no corners, infinitely symmetrical. Of all the shapes this bubble could be,
What's up, Eric?
the
Welcome.
sphere is the one with the smallest surface area, which makes it the most efficient shape possible. And it is because nature wants to use their resources effectively that we can see spheres everywhere we look. The Earth is round because gravity pulls the planet's bulk into a ball around its core. Water forms into spherical droplets. The shape minimizes the amount of surface tension needed to hold the droplet together. And a spherical shape gives simple life forms, like this Volvox plankton, optimal contact with their surrounding environment. But not everything is spherical. And because bubbles are so thin and flexible, we can use them to create other shapes.
So a single bubble in the air is always a sphere. If they touch each other, they can save material for both of them by sharing a common wall. And so they do. If they can save surface area by taking advantage of their environment, they will.
So when you've got just one bubble, the sphere is the most efficient shape. But as we add more bubbles, we see the geometry changing. So in this case, we've got 4 bubbles, and you can see them meeting at a point. But put a shape in the middle, we don't get a spherical bubble. We get, in fact, a little
So, Johnny?
4 faces. They're not exactly flat, they're parts of spheres. But each time the bubbles are trying to find the most efficient shape for the arrangement of bubbles. So now we've got 6 bubbles, we've got a little cube appearing in the middle. This is nature's laws at work. The universe is always and as we pop them,
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it. I'm happy I got to record it.
But what's most remarkable,
Trying to get this
is that
ring
those
right here.
solutions are so often neat geometric shapes.
What have you been up to?
It's fantastic. And they're almost perfect pentagons, aren't they? That's really surprising. They're not bulging really very much at all.
That's right.
So 12 bubbles around make 12 faces, and the most economical shape that they can make with less energy is the dodecahedron.
Yeah.
The soap bubble reveals something fundamental about nature. It's lazy. It tries to find the most efficient shape, the one using the least energy, the least amount of space. And it appears there are fixed rules about how it finds these economic solutions. The bubbles are incredibly dynamic, but each time one pops, they're always trying to assume the most efficient shape, the one that uses the least energy. And what they're doing is trying to minimize the surface area across the whole bubble structure. This beautifully illustrates
Yes, go for that one.
fundamental rules of bubbles, which is 3 walls of a
Oh,
bubble
no,
or
go for
leaves
it.
always always at a 120-degree angle. Wherever you are in the foam, it's the same law. But if we in fact make each of the bubbles the same size, a rather magical shape starts to appear.
Damn.
The hexagon. And when you pack lots of hexagons together, the pattern that spontaneously emerges is the familiar sight of a tightly ordered honeycomb. So when we see that pattern at the heart of the beehive, it is in fact echoing some of the fundamental geometric laws of the universe.
Oh, shit.
It's the principles you see in that help explain where all structure comes from. And it's those same fundamental laws of shape that played out on the Giant's Causeway in the distant geological past. 50 million years ago, before there was any thought of warring giants, this area was very unstable. There was a huge amount of volcanic activity. The molten rock forced its way through the chalk pits beneath our feet, and then spread out, forming a huge lava lake. As it cooled, the lake contracted, and as it shrunk, it cracked. And as the cracks spread, they sought out the most efficient path through the lava, which turned out to be this neat hexagonal pattern, leaving this monument to the order and economy of nature.
It's an engineering wonder for sure.
The code reveals itself where you would least expect it. It defines the shape of honeycomb.
They've just done it for thousands and thousands of years. They were born to do it.
And it forms Ulster's epic coastline. Into this rugged, natural environment.
Yeah.
And it appears in the lazy efficiency.
Appreciate it. Thanks, bro.
About
Angles and math, bro. That's why I'm watching this shit right here.
These natural codes are so fundamental that they've been appropriated by artists and architects to shape the modern world. So this is the Olympic Stadium that was built in Munich in 1972. Also scene of a rather famous victory for England, a rare 1-5-1 to us against Germany. It's really stunning, but I'm quite surprised at how insubstantial it feels. It feels like it could blow away in the wind. It's got those features you expect from nature, kind of very elegant, but rather delicate feel to it. It's almost more like a cobweb than a man-made structure. It was very difficult to build structures like this. The distribution of forces that's going on inside this roof are incredibly complicated. It'd been almost impossible to calculate by hand a shape like this that'd be both stable and affordable. But the revolutionary engineer Fry Otto realised that you don't have to do these calculations by hand. Otto was desperate to find new shapes and forms to build. So he looked to nature and the fundamental principles of the code for inspiration. What Otto did was to make models like this one here. It's constructed out of string.
Hey, have you ever seen anyone break the way I do?
Not very much, but when I dip the string inside the soap solution and pull it up, then something rather surprising happens. Beautiful shapes beginning to emerge inside the soap film. And you can see that they're not just exact triangles, you get wonderful curves and arcs that Otto knew were inherently stable. And you can see that they're not just exact triangles, you get wonderful curves and arcs that Otto knew were inherently stable. And you can see that they're not just exact triangles, you get wonderful curves and arcs that Otto knew were inherently stable. Ooh, that's
You started a league today?
The surface tension pulls the strings into the most sparing shape for each arrangement. What results is a shape.
What league? League for what?
But remarkably
Pool?
striking too.
So he could make copies of these shapes, make small little models, which would then be used to construct the groundbreaking structures you see behind me.
You did a league for pool?
Fry Otto started something of a revolution in architecture. The sweeping curves of the Munich Stadium are echoed in
Nice.
countless modern structures.
What made you do that?
And although Otto discovered the mathematical and aesthetic beauty of the code in the 20th century, there's evidence that this obsession with form stretches back thousands of years.
These stone balls were found in Scotland, and they date back to the Neolithic period, which is over 4,000 years ago.
Scratched. Wow.
They found hundreds of these balls. It's not really clear what they were used for. It's a bit of a mystery. But now imagine the amount of work that's gone into
I just can't believe I scratched right
making
now.
these shapes. For example, this one here has got 4 different faces arranged in
Wow.
a beautifully symmetrical manner. This one here is 6 faces, a bit like a cube. And you can see some of them are really intricate. This one's got, I don't know how many nodules on there. Some of them have got up to 160 different nodules. But these stones really show an obsession with symmetry and regularity already thousands of years ago.
This obsession with shape isn't unique to the ancient Scots. We find it in other cultures all over the world. The Egyptians had their pyramids, of course. But it was the Greeks who first took this innate fascination with shape and turned it into a subject of its own. They
Wow.
believed that by understanding its principles,
Wow.
they could describe the whole world. And they gave a name to this new idea,
Wow.
which meant measuring the earth. They called it geometry.
The mainstay of Greek geometry was the discovery of 5 perfect shapes near to after the Greek philosopher Plato, who believed these were the building blocks of nature. So we've got the tetrahedron with its 4 faces, the cube with its 6 faces, the octahedron with its 8 faces, the dodecahedron 12 faces.
I've seen it done.
Today,
So, no, let's talk to somebody. Can't believe I lost that last one.
We're all used to the familiar 6-sided dice. But these 4 other shapes have also been used as dice for centuries. What makes them
Hey,
perfect for the
Scottish.
job
Thanks for
is
the
that they are
follow.
so
Come check you out later, bro.
The faces of each are all the same shape, all meet at the same angles. It means that there's no way of telling one end from another, and that they are equally likely to land on any face. But most surprisingly, these are the only 5 shapes like this that can possibly exist. They're the only perfectly symmetrical solids.
The only symmetrical solids. What?
It's this almost magical symmetry which made the Greeks believe that these shapes were so important. They associated them with the building blocks of nature: air, fire, earth, the cosmos, and water. These 5 shapes built the natural world. It's very easy.
What that fool
This
said?
approach
Those
is
5
easy.
shapes build the natural
It's
world.
clear that the world around us isn't made out of just 5 neat geometric shapes. Perhaps you should have more faith in this ancient intuition. Because by laying out the laws of geometry, the Greeks had in fact tapped straight into the code that shapes all nature.
Welcome.
It turns out that the Greeks were right about their shapes, but they couldn't have known it.
What's up, PH? How you doing today?
Was completely invisible to them. We can find traces of it deep underground. This is the
Everything all right?
mine in the heart of what used to be East Germany.
I'm good.
It's long
Refreshed.
since production.
I went ham this past weekend on COD.
Miles of tunnels.
What's wrong? Oh, I'm good, man. Just living life, waiting for school to start.
That's stunning, my God. I've never seen anything like this. In fact,
Yeah,
the only one
decided to go that route.
Absolutely amazing.
Maybe that'll help me out.
On and on down through
The
the cave.
cave is full of perfectly cubic crystals that mirror the geometric precision of the platonic solids.
These cubes are amazing. I mean, look at that. The surface there is perfectly flat. And if you run your finger down the edge here, it's so sharp, comes down to its precise right angle. I mean, an architect would be happy.
I'm just gonna scratch or miss.
Isn't it real?
Well, add me.
Even if you look inside, you can see
I'm not that
small
good.
cracks at right angles and geometric shapes. Totally surreal.
You said it, huh, Johnny?
Actually, this isn't anything particularly special.
Man, just let me get my life.
But, I mean, you don't generally see salt as big a cube as this one here.
How these crystals were able to form with such perfect precision was a mystery until just over 100 years ago.
Yay! Appreciate it. I'll pay it forward. You have a good time at online classes. Have a fresh one.
Inside the human body. And when X-rays were shone through crystals, they uncovered another invisible world. One that was both mysterious and geometric. This.
Damn, you're at 21?
And these
wow.
Symmetrical images
good work.
Called diffraction
You've been putting in work.
Can reveal how individual atoms were put together to form the crystals in this cave.
That's hey, I think when it wasn't that high when we first started talking. That shit got up there, bro. Peace. Be blessed. Do the best you can. Go follow PH. Try to get it to 25. Appreciate it. I'll pay it forward.
How the atoms are arranged inside the salt.
And there is only one possible arrangement of these atoms that can produce patterns like these. And it too, unsurprisingly, is a cube.
A cube?
This is a model of the structure of salt. Now these gold balls
are
the sodium atoms and the green ones are the chlorine atoms. And it's this atomic symmetry which explains why we're seeing such symmetry in these huge great big crystals. But instead of just 3 atoms lining themselves up in this model, we've got billions and billions of sodium and chlorine atoms arranging themselves rigidly to create these perfect cubes.
The bun's still good? It's a month old.
What?
It's not moldy, but it's a month old.
So special is that the perfect geometric arrangement of atoms has been maintained in these huge crystals. They're a window into nature and how it's governed by the laws of geometry at the most fundamental atomic level.
Can you send me what?
What's surprising is that we can find the same laws, not just in rocks and minerals, but deep inside ourselves. I've come to the Department of Chemical and Structural Biology at Imperial College in London. Steve Matthews studies how individual atoms are built up into living systems.
What do you do?
X-rays are obviously very powerful.
All right, if you're not active, I will follow you. Just saying, but
Proteins are very delicate, so we cool it down with a stream of liquid nitrogen gas.
Oh, okay.
In this tiny wire loop is another crystal.
come check you out later.
This time, it's a crystal of protein, part of the machinery of living cells.
WWE on here.
Just as it's possible to work
I need the numbers.
structure of the salt crystals with X-rays, we can deduce the shape of the protein molecules in the same way, though the results aren't quite so easy.
I know, but I need the numbers.
Now, I'd be hard pushed to actually give a name to that shape mathematically. I mean, it looks like a blob. But, you know, it doesn't have shape, but many of these blobs come together to form shapes.
Right there.
So there's a huge amount of structure and symmetry in this protein. And, yeah, that's amazing. We've got a cylinder now. This is a real surprise to see geometry at work inside our bodies. But evolution is, creates a very efficient process. So symmetry is a very efficient way of building.
You go to whatever game you're playing. So say I'm playing 8-ball pool. It's gonna have its own little thing right there, and then it'll have this card.
If you really want symmetry, then we can move over to.
Then before this ever comes up, it's gonna ask you if you want to put your ID on there, and you find your ID and your profile on here.
So it seems that viruses are It's very striking because the physical world.
And then you can add it.
Expects maybe salt crystals to be symmetric, but the biological world.
You'll go to, this is the pool one, 8-ball pool, and it'll come up each time. So if you log on to 8-ball pool right now, and you're on omelet, this will pop up. You'll see that.
It seems like the Greeks could have been right after all. It's their shapes that fill the world around us and produce its inherent beauty.
The code dictates some shapes through efficiency, and others by providing frameworks for the tiniest particles there are. What the Greeks discovered in mathematical theory is to be found at the heart of nature, from crystals to viruses. It all seems very neat. But our world isn't filled with precise geometric shapes. It seems random, disordered. To find out why, we need to look to the sky and the crystals that fall from it. Snowflakes find themselves in the heart of frozen clouds and fall to Earth in a dazzling display. And if there's one thing we know about snowflakes, it's perfectly symmetrical.
What's your number?
Here we are. It's the Snow Lab.
Physicist Kenneth Liebrecht has created a lab for growing and photographing these perfect crystals.
It's a cold chamber. It's actually cold on the bottom, very cold, about minus 40 on the bottom and about plus 40 on top.
So in some sense, this machine is trying to replicate what happens inside a snowplow.
In a sense, that's right. I mean, it's not hard to grow ice crystals. All you need is cold and water.
In the freezing
322.
conditions of the chamber,
All right.
we should be able to see the inherent geometry of the world emerging in front of our eyes as the crystals start to form.
And now, with any luck, we will see some stars growing on the ends of those needles.
As the temperature drops, billions of water molecules coalesce out of the vapour, spontaneously arranging themselves into these 6 pointed patterns. At least, that's the theory. But the reality turns out to be very different. As Ken found out, even in laboratory conditions, it's almost impossible to grow perfect snowflakes.
I don't think any of these are symmetrical, so...
You want to play one?
What's the chance of getting a perfectly symmetrical snowflake inside?
The really beautiful photogenic snowflakes are
Let's go.
really about 1 in a million. I mean, they're
Really? Wow.
sometimes they've got 5 sides or 3
5
sides.
sides? Oh no.
or 3, or sometimes you get a blob. It's a little hard to see, but this mess here is one funny looking snowflake.
We do tend to think of the snowflake as something which is beautifully symmetrical, but actually that's just some idealized notion. And the reality is that they're actually much more complex and irregular than we think they are.
At the molecular scale, it's quite perfect, but as the crystal gets bigger,
Yeah.
the atoms don't hook on always exactly the right way, so when it grows, how it grows depends on the environment, the temperature and the humidity. So it starts growing one way, and then it moves to a different spot in the cloud and grows a different way, and then a different way, and a different way, and so by the time the crystal hits the ground, it's had a very complex growth history, and so it ends up with a very complex crystal. There it goes.
You know how to play 9-ball, right?
It seems that you can only come so far in trying to describe the world with simple geometry. You can see it at work in the salt crystals in the crystal cave. But in truth, that's one of the very few places in the world where you'll find such crystals. The bees use simple geometry to make their honeycomb, but they've evolved to perform that task over many thousands of years. And it's only occasionally that you'll ever find a purely symmetrical snowflake.
Yeah, bro.
Because although everything is formed in tidy geometry at the atomic level, that underlying order falls apart amid all the competing forces of our chaotic world. Even the Giant's Causeway isn't really a neat hexagonal array.
It's
Well, add me here. Just add these
There
numbers right here.
are pentagons, 7-sided columns, even a few with 8 sides. That network of perfectly interlocking hexagons just doesn't exist.
The world clearly isn't just built through simple geometric shapes. The movement of the sea and the flow of the waves are far too complicated to explain in these terms. It's difficult to imagine how we could ever find a code to explain all this complexity.
But what if there are patterns to the chaos of nature? Patterns that we're not aware of, but that we're attuned to on a subconscious level? This barn was home to one of the artistic revolutions of the 20th century. The painter who worked here had become disillusioned with conventional painting techniques. In fact, he stopped painting altogether and started splattering.
He was as controversial as the art he produced. An arrogant, self-destructive drunk, and perhaps a visionary. His name was Justin Fox.
The floor you can still see is covered in paint. What Pollock would do was to lay a canvas out on the floor. And then, often intoxicated, he would drip and flip the paint all over the surface. He'd come back week after week, adding more and more layers, more and more colours. The result was extraordinary. There were huge outbursts of abstract expressionism, just covered in paint, scattered all over the place.
Pollock's paintings sent shockwaves through the art world. No one had ever seen anything like this before. Life magazine declared him Artist of the Century. Others derided his efforts as the substandard dross of a drunken lunatic. But though Pollock's paintings courted controversy, they were incredibly influential. Not least because the apparent random squiggles were strangely compelling.
Many people have tried to copy Pollock's techniques, some in homage, others in attempted forgeries. But nobody seems to be able to reproduce that magic that Pollock brought to the original.
Pollock's paintings seem to have captured something of the wildness of the natural world. But for a long time, no one could define exactly what it was that made his work so appealing. Until it came to the attention of artists.
This guy I'm playing is probably like one of the best.
Richard Taylor. His unique approach was to invent a machine that could mimic Pollock's eccentric painting style.
It's all based on this apparatus called the Pollockizer.
The Pollockizer?
Absolutely. Now what it is essentially though is what's called a kicked pendulum. And as you know, a basic pendulum is very, very regular. Like
You still gotta get that red out of there.
What you've got is a little device that can actually knock the string as it's swinging around. And that induces a very different type of motion called chaotic motion.
So this would be like Pollock's hand. This would be what he'd be trying to achieve with that sort of off-balance painting that we do.
Absolutely. So they're very similar processes.
It's very effective.
He's gonna kick it back.
By recreating his technique, the Pollockizer is able to mimic one particular aspect of the artist's work. And that is that it appears to be
Keep on seeing these patterns unfolding in front of you.
Right. Let me add you real quick, bro.
All of those patterns at different size scales look the same.
This is a property known as fractal.
So if I took different scales and showed them to somebody, sometimes they wouldn't be able to tell.
I went to go add you, just started up again.
Absolutely. So as long as you can't see that canvas edge, then you have no idea whether you're standing 30 feet away or 2 feet away. They'll both have exactly the same level of complexity.
Hey Johnny, you can't add me, bro?
Pollock was able to consistently repeat the same level of complexity at different scales throughout his paintings. The fractal quality of his work appeals to us because despite seeming abstract, it actually mirrors the reality of the world around us.
When we started to actually analyse the buried patterns in there, this amazing thing emerged. Deep down hidden in there is this level of mathematical structure.
There's this really delicate interplay between something that looks messy and chaotic, but actually it has structure and some underlying code hidden in something.
Absolutely, and you can see it not only
bad shot for him,
but you see them everywhere. You know, like a tree outside. You look at the tree from far away, you see this big trunk with a few branches going on. Superficially, they look cluttered and they look incredibly complex, but your eye can sense that there's a sort of underlying mathematical structure to it all. Pollock was the first person to actually put it on canvas in a direct fashion that no other artist has ever done. It really is the basic fingerprint of nature.
And that's what's most fascinating about Pollock's art. In creating works devoid of conventional meaning, he had in fact stumbled across something fundamental. Because fractals are how nature builds the world. Clouds are fractal because they display the same quality. Giant clouds are identical to tiny ones. And it's the same with rocks. From appearances, you can't tell if you're looking at an enormous mountain or a humble boulder. And then there are living fractals, like this tree.
It's quite easy to see how fractal it is, because if you take one of the branches, it looks remarkably like a small version of the tree itself. And if you look at the twigs coming off the branch, they have the same shape. So
All bets are off.
Appearing again and again,
Not making it.
smaller and smaller scales.
And trees also demonstrate the great powers of fractal systems. Their great complexity stems from very simple rules.
Now, the reason the tree makes this shape is because it wants to maximise the amount of sunlight it gets. Very clever, but also very simple, because you just need one rule to create this shape. What the tree does is to grow, then divide, grow, then divide. And by using this one rule, we get this incredibly complex shape we call a tree.
This is the same pattern repeating itself at a smaller and smaller scale. It's a rule that's easy to test. Grow a bit, then branch. Grow a bit, then branch. And before our eyes, a mathematically perfect tree appears. But just as you never get a perfect snowflake throughout nature, this idea that the patterns of nature may be inherently fractal was pioneered in the 1970s by French mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot. This is his most famous creation, the Mandelbrot set. Its systems of circles and swirls repeats itself at smaller and smaller scales forever. And this infinite complexity was created from just one very simple mathematical function. Mandelbrot's quantum leap was to suggest that similar simple mathematical codes could describe not just trees, but many of the seemingly random shapes of much of the natural world.
You got it, Johnny?
And the most powerful demonstration of that belief comes not from maths or nature, but from make-believe. In the 1980s, a computer scientist working for the aircraft manufacturer Boeing was struggling to create computer-generated pictures of planes.
At Boeing, we discovered a method of making curved surfaces, very nice curved surfaces, so I was applying it to airplanes. And Boeing publicity photos have mountains behind the airplanes, and so I wanted to be able to put a mountain behind my airplane, but I had no idea of the mathematics of how to do that, not at school.
So you wanted something that however far or near away you were, it would
I was waiting for you, bro.
To show that the
next one
were real and live in the sense that you could move around them with a camera. So the algorithm needed to be invented, and so that's what I set my mind to doing, was invent the algorithm that would produce the mountain pictures.
At the time, even creating a virtual cylinder was hard, so generating the apparently random jaggedness of a realistic mountain range seemed impossible. Then, I found inspiration.
Coincidentally, at that time, Mandelbrot's book came out. He had pictures that showed what fractal mathematics could produce.
I am taking my time, bro.
Wow, all I have to do is find a way to implement this mathematics on my computer, and I can make pictures of mountains.
Lauren set to work to investigate how Mandelbrot's theories about the real world could be used to make virtual ones.
This is a little film I made in 1980, and the landscape is...
We're going to get down right now, Johnny.
...by hand of about 100 big triangles.
Yeah, so that doesn't look very natural.
No, it's very pyramid-like. So what we're going to do is take each of these big triangles and break it up into little triangles, and break those little triangles up into littler triangles until it gets down to the point where you can't see triangles anymore.
All right. This guy got me with no guidelines right now, which isn't too hard. Testing me.
What Warren had realised was that he could use the maths of fractals to turn just a handful of triangles into realistic virtual
He's
worlds.
testing me. What are you eating? Is there any more hamburgers? Is there any more hamburgers?
Their existence to the code. An empire built on the power of fractals.
Did you realise at the time the potential of the discovery you'd made?
Well, I knew that within a half a second that it was a major discovery. I've seen all the special effects, all the movies you can imagine. Nothing was like that. My heart skipped.
And the power of fractals is still to be found hidden in the fabric of Pixar movies. They use the rules of repetition and self-similarity to create the rocks, clouds, and forests. In fact, the realism and complexity of these virtual worlds is only possible using mathematics. Fractals are everywhere in these movies. They generate the texture of the rocks. And they bring the jungle alive. Worlds are so realistic, demonstrates the power of maths to describe the complexity of nature. They are evidence that we have glimpsed the code that governs the shape of the world.
But that code is a complicated one. If we want to understand the shape of the world, then we need to recognise the simple geometry of form at work at the most basic level.
We need to understand that the universe is lazy, and that it will always seek out the most efficient solution. That at the atomic level, the world is structured around strict geometric laws. The Greeks, thousands of
Come on,
years ago.
Johnny.
We also need to appreciate the complexity of that geometry, playing out against the competing forces of the natural world.
And that
Thanks for the
means
follow,
us,
Nightcrawl.
even the apparent randomness we see
Where you
around
at,
us
Johnny?
is underwritten by mathematical rules like fractals. So can explain the patterns to the structure of trees and the realism of virtual worlds.
Damn, 276?
How the planets we find our world, it provides a reason, an underlying
God
explanation
damn,
for why
Johnny.
people behave as they do.
You put in work. Bro, you're at a high ass level.
For as long as human beings have walked upon Earth, we've tried to make sense of our world and predict what the future will bring.
For real, dog.
Today,
That's a lot.
our lives seem more complicated
You a
and
vet.
unpredictable than ever.
On the low.
Half the population of the planet now live in busy, sprawling cities.
Every day throws out thousands of different encounters, massive interactions and
Off the
forces
yellow.
seem beyond our control. It's hard to see how any of this could be connected.
Oh, almost.
Yet when we start to look closely at all this complexity, surprising patterns begin to emerge. It's these patterns that I believe point to an underlying code at the very heart of existence that controls not only our world and everything in it, but even us.
Excalibur Q, bro.
As a mathematician, I'm fascinated by the patterns we see all around us.
Got lucky.
Patterns that reflect the hidden connections between everything. From the movement of rush hour crowds to the shifting shape of a flock of starlings. The cacophony of the billion internet searches and the vagaries of the weather.
No, 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 no.
Together, these patterns and connections make up the code. A model of our world that describes not only how it works, but can also predict what our future holds.
You should have done that the first time before your last shot. Off your purple side pocket. Oh, almost.
500 years ago, a ship was caught in a terrible storm. As rain lashed the decks and gale-force winds tore through the rigging, the ship began to take on water. The captain had no choice but to run his ship aground and wait for help.
Yeah, I'm just playing defense, bro. You got this shot, right? Pretty sure you do.
After 8 long months, and with his
Don't forget your
crew
English.
starvation, the captain came up with an ingenious plan.
Don't forget your
He
English.
summoned the local chief and told him his god was
You did English, bro.
so angry, in fact, that if they didn't bring supplies within 3 days, God would swallow the moon. And sure enough, as the moon rose on the 3rd night, it had already begun to disappear.
Terrified, the locals ran from all directions towards the ship, laden with
I could tell.
provisions.
The year was 1504, and the captain, Christopher Columbus. And the reason he was apparently able to command the heavens was because he had something like this.
It's a set of lunar tables, and each one of these numbers represents a lunar. And it says that in about 5 hours' time, the same thing is going to happen to the moon here in Cyprus.
During a lunar eclipse, the Earth passes between the sun and the moon, casting its shadow across the lunar surface.
And there it goes. The moon has been swallowed up in the shadow of the Earth. And the amazing thing is actually the moon doesn't completely disappear because it's kind of red, ghostly moon up there. And that's because the light from the sun is being refracted around the Earth. Really quite spooky.
That's right, YOLO.
I can imagine how terrified the islanders would have been when they saw that 500 years ago. And the only explanation for them would have been that the gods really were angry with them.
We now know that the movement of the planets is incredibly predictable. By understanding the code, we can model their orbits far back into the past and see thousands of years into the future.
It's thanks to the code that we're no longer frightened by an eclipse. In fact, the code is such a powerful thing that I'm even prepared to entrust my life to it.
Let's go. Can I get a burger? Is there any more burgers
This
cooked?
strange contraption is 5.5 meters high. Using the force of gravity, a 30-kilogram ball will hurtle down the ramp and fire off the end. And when it does, I will be sitting directly in its path. If I get my sums wrong, I'll be killed in the throat.
To calculate how far the ball's going to go, I need some key measurements about the ramp. Little h is 0.8 meters.
I am.
The angle
It'll be my last game right here.
9.1 degrees. So gravity, I know, on the Earth is 9.8 meters per second squared. Interestingly, you don't have to know
I gotta go eat.
the ball is, the mass of the ball. That's not relevant to how far the thing's going to go. 2 times gravity times the
Casi,
height,
casi, casi.
5.5, multiplied by the speed, by 49.1 to the coast. That will give me a distance of 9.95 meters. But we've got air resistance, there's friction on the ramp as well. What about the wind today? Okay, so the predicted distance is going to be 5.6 meters. That's where I think the ball is going to land. Which means if I set up my deck chair here, I should be able to watch the whole thing in
I'm
complete
gonna jump in the
safety.
shower. Baby's sleeping in the swing.
Okay, release the ball. And that is the power of the code. We We can do this again and again and again. And the numbers mean the ball is going to land in the same place each time.
If everything in the world behaved according to equations that give definite answers, then we'd be able to predict the future with absolute certainty. But unfortunately, things aren't quite that simple. The natural world often appears so complex, it's hard to imagine we could write equations to describe it. Even though we might glimpse what we think are patterns, they seem almost impossible to understand.
I've come to witness a mysterious phenomenon that happens here in Denmark. First few appearing, I think.
Good game, bro.
These are stories. Their dance obscures the fading evening light, giving the formation its eerie name. The Black Sun.
Nothing. What's up?
Any predators that might be looking for a bit of dinner before. Look at that. Amazing, there's so many of them. I wonder they don't smash into each other and sort of knock some out of the sky, but they don't seem to. Incredible synchronicity.
All right, bro. I'm just waiting for my food. Then I'm gonna take a break.
You're never quite sure what it's going to do next.
It's an almost impossible achievement. How can each bird predict the movements of thousands of others?
That's extraordinary.
As strange as it seems, by reducing each starling to numbers, we can model what's happening on a computer. We start with a flock of virtual starlings, all flying at different speeds and in different directions. And then we give them some simple rules. The first is for each bird to fly at the same speed. The second rule is to stay close to your neighbours. And finally, if you see a predator nearby, get out of the way. 3 simple rules are all it takes to create something that looks uncannily like the movement of a real flock of starlings.
Oh, here they come.
In fact, a recent study has shown that even in a flock of hundreds of thousands of birds, each starling only has to keep track of its 7 nearest neighbours.
Oh God. The sky's clear again. Who'd have thought that something so extraordinarily complex as a constantly shifting flock of thousands of birds in flight can have at its heart such a simple and elegant code?
It seems inconceivable that human beings could ever be reduced to a mathematical model like Darwin's. But Ian Cousin studies how animals behave in groups, and his research has revealed some surprising parallels.
How can you possibly begin to understand something like this huge mass of people? Even when you look at the crowd for a few seconds, you realise there's so many complicated.
I started my research looking at simple organisms like ant swarms, schooling fish, and remarkably, our insights from studying those systems led to new insights in studying human crowds.
But people are much more complicated than a fish or an ant.
Exactly, but that's almost the beauty of this, is we're thinking about much more interesting things when we're walking through crowds than how do I avoid that person, how do I avoid that obstacle. We're thinking about what we're going to cook for dinner or what our friends are doing. And so in actual fact, we're
Welcome.
autopilot. And we're actually using very simple rules of interaction, just like the schooling fish and the swarming ants.
So can we learn things from the ants?
We learn an immense amount from the ants. The ants don't suffer from
let's see what this is about.
They're not selfish, and I'm afraid to say we are. We want to minimize our own travel time, but we don't necessarily care whether we do so at the expense of other individuals.
Of all the animals Ian has studied, human beings are in some ways...
Hey, can you get out of here with that shit, bro?
We walk at an optimum speed
That's disrespectful.
of 1.3 meters per second, and prefer to walk in straight lines to get to our destination.
You know how many little kids are around here for you to be doing that?
What happens is you will naturally fall into the slipstream of an individual moving in the same direction as you. And so without you even knowing it, you're forming a lane. And similarly, pedestrians moving in the other direction will also form lanes. Very much like
Why would you even do that?
These lanes help us to avoid collisions. However, in a large open space, like the concourse at Grand Central
What's the point?
Station, the lanes inevitably cross each other, which could lead to congestion. But
Why are you being disrespectful?
like this information desk in the middle of the crowd.
Nothing?
Rather than getting in the way,
Alright.
it acts like a roundabout and increases the flow through the station by as much as 13%. These rules are so effective at predicting what we'll do. They can even be used
Not
to
even
see
funny, bro.
crowds of people.
Each individual is actually described by a set of numbers as they move through an environment.
Exactly, we're capturing the average type of behaviour of pedestrians. We're capturing these simple and local rules that people use within crowds to then make predictions as to how the whole crowd is going to flow through different types of environments.
We can use this underlying code of the crowd to design buildings that are more efficient and safer. Simulations like these are able to accurately predict how quickly a building can be evacuated, even before it has been built.
As a crowd, people are incredibly predictable. There are simple rules that we follow without being aware of it.
But most of the time, we don't live on autopilot. And when the crowd disperses, so too do the rules of group behaviour. As individuals with our own free will, we're much harder to predict. Or so we think.
What's the point? What's the point?
Before we get started, I would like to mention the rules. They are very simple. There are 3 throws and there are only 3 throws. We use a 3 prime shoot, which means you go 1, 2, 3, and you release your throw on 4. A throw of rock is a closed fist. You can throw it any way you want as long as it is a closed fist. Your paper must be horizontal. Your scissors must be vertical. That will be a foul.
The game of rock, paper, scissors is known all over the world. And some people take it very seriously.
For those of you who don't know, and there should be very few, the throw of paper covers the throw of rock. The throw of scissors cuts the throw of paper. The throw of rock crushes the throw of scissors.
In Philadelphia, the Rock, Paper, Scissors League competes 4 times a week. The people in this room are fighting
Thanks
to
for
go
the
to
follow.
the World Championship in Las Vegas and a chance to win $10,000.
Sweetgy in the lead. Rock crushes scissors for Sweetgy. You're on the verge of elimination, Drew Bag. Third and final set. Winner moves on. Rock crushes scissors. And what a match to take us down to the final 4.
The intriguing thing about this game is that it should be impossible to predict what your opponent's going to do next.
Scissors are all pretty much equivalent. So each throw beats one and loses to another. So essentially
The reason it's so hard to catch serial killers is because there's often no link to their crimes. They kill random strangers in locations they have no obvious connection to.
it's very common in the investigation of a serial murder case to have hundreds, thousands,
tens of thousands of suspects. It's a needle in a haystack problem. Where do you start?
In 1888, the most notorious serial killer of all, Jack the Ripper, killed 5 women in London's East End. Since then, countless people have tried to solve the mystery of the Ripper's identity. But Rosno thinks he could have tracked him down without seeing his flash of evidence. Because he's worked out where Jack the Ripper most likely lived, based only on the location of the crimes.
Flower and Dean Street should have been the epicenter of their search.
And all he used to do it is an equation.
Inherently, we're all lazy, and criminals just as much as anyone else. They want to accomplish their goals closer to home rather than further away because it involves too much effort, too much time, too much travel.
The first half of Rosno's equation models what's known as the least effort principle. It means that the crime locations are statistically more likely the nearer they are to where the offender lives.
If you have a choice of going to the corner store for a loaf of bread or going to one that's 7 miles down the road, you're going to pick the corner store.
It seems a bit gruesome to apply the same thing to a serial killer as to going and buying a loaf of bread or milk.
Well, actually, if we can get over the horrible nature of these crimes and recognize that these are human beings like the rest of us, we can